Hello and welcome to This Week in the Middle East with me, Francis Matthew. We'll start with some headlines for this very traumatic week, which Eddie has got lined up.
In This Week in the Middle East, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said on the 18th of January that he had told the US he opposes the establishment of a Palestinian state once the conflict in Gaza comes to an end. On the 18th of January, Pakistan launched missile strikes into Iran, killing 9 people after Iran carried out strikes in Pakistan. Iran said 5 of its Revolutionary Guards were killed in a missile strike on a house in Damascus on the 20th of January, for which it blamed Israel. The US Central Command forces on the same day struck a Houthi anti-ship missile that was aimed into the Gulf of Aden.
So there we have it. That's the week when Netanyahu finally came out and admitted he doesn't want a two-state solution. So to discuss this, we've got Eddie O'Sullivan, who joins us. Eddie, hello.
Hello, Francis. Lovely to see you again.
It's a rough week to do it, though. It's a rough week.
It is. And I'd love to be able to talk more positively about the region, but we've seen, from the headlines, which reflect the truth, that things are not looking very good, Francis.
I mean, the big one there was Netanyahu finally came out and said bluntly, we don't want the two-state solution. Now, is this honesty, a refreshing clarity, or was he fooling everybody, or where would you see all that?
Well, I suspect that Netanyahu himself would consider this to be an unnecessary fuss. He was elected for the first time as prime minister in 1996 in Israel, when they had a directly elected prime minister. And he said that there would be no two-state solution. That's 1996, and my calculation, that is 28 years ago. And since that time, he's been the prime minister most of the time. He's never changed his tune, privately at least. And certainly every time he makes a public statement, he's been making that assertion. So there really should be no shock that he said it. But the context is why it is particularly disturbing that the Gaza conflict, which the United States, United Kingdom, the countries of the region are all arguing must eventually lead to some kind of comprehensive settlement, is based upon their desires based upon a two-state solution. And Netanyahu's come out now quite publicly and said he cannot envisage a Palestinian state after the Gaza conflict. He just does not want to see it.
I mean, we can come to the looking ahead part of that, which I think is very important. But the prior part is also important. I mean, the whole international community has been saying two-state solution, even as settlers have flooded into the West Bank. The two-state on the West Bank has got worse and worse. I mean, when I was in the East Jerusalem last and traveled to Ramallah to see some friends, I mean, the difficulty of getting there was you had to go through that wall, you had to be searched, examined. Some people could come with me, some people could not. Some of the people I went to see weren't allowed to move there. So the way that West Bank has been cut up makes the two-state solution completely impractical.
Absolutely. The word impractical is absolutely there. And I think it's been evident for at least 10 years, and I think longer, that the practical obstacles to create a connected single Palestinian state with full authority, the practical obstacles that these are now really insuperable. However, the approach taken by the United States, United Kingdom, the international community, is that they have emphasized the two-state solution. But something like a fig leaf, Francis, to cover up the fact of what's actually happening in the ground.
So that leaves us with the strange situation of looking ahead to possibly 3 options. One is the two-state solution of independent states working together. One is the one-state solution of everybody becomes Israeli. And then there's a third option, which is just continued occupation. My own guess is the third one is the one which will run.
Well, that is basically what most people have actually concluded who dealt with the reality on the ground. The political reality of Israel is there's an insufficient number of people amongst Israeli voters prepared to vote strongly in favor of a two-state solution. It can't work. A Palestinian can't work without the goodwill of Israel. They have to have the overwhelming support, not only of the elected leaders, but the people of Israel. If the people of Israel really hate the Palestinian state, it's not going to work. So that practical issue is there. The Palestinian sentiment is there. So I think the occupation looked like it's going to go on forever. But I think Gaza, my feeling is the Gaza crisis, which is continuing as we're speaking, has changed things.
Yes.
It's a kind of 9/11 moment, to use that cliche, in which people might say, well, things have fundamentally changed. And the fundamental change is that the occupation simply cannot continue. It cannot continue. So everybody's going to have to face up to the options you've got, which are two, which is the twin state solution, which looks impractical, and the second, which is a one state solution, which has got many practical difficulties, but I think is beginning to rise up the potential agenda in due course. It won't happen quickly, but I think it's beginning to happen.
I think you're surprisingly optimistic. If it can, it's going to work. But it's. I mean, Netanyahu, it's very clear. I mean, he said Israel wants to manage the security from the river to the sea, to take a phrase from somebody else, and that means you're going to have second-class Palestinians in a unitary state.
Well, that's I saw a very interesting interview with someone who's an Israeli nationalist, a pro-settler, pro-Likud, pro-person, very hard line, who said actually the practical realities are that the twin state solution can't work, two-state solution can't work. Therefore, we have to look at a single state solution. And she argued, rather interestingly, that the demographic trends within what was the Palestine mandate, which everyone said, well, at present it's 50-50 Palestinian, Israeli, or Palestinian or Jew. She argued that, in fact, Israelis don't have to fear as much as they did, because the birth rate amongst Israelis is now beginning to creep up, and that the demographic preponderance, which means that in a single state, even with everybody having the vote, an extraordinary thought, could actually work. Now, these are early days, and this is a very impractical thing. I'm not optimistic, but I think the Gaza events, it is impossible, I think, for even the most optimistic person to believe that after this, and it's not finished by any means, then after this, you can go back to the status quo ante. I think that's intolerable. So it's a very big hot potato, and it is right in the hands now of the US administration at the worst possible time for Biden, slap bang in an election campaign where he's facing what looks like a very popular alternative candidate in the form of Donald Trump, who, as this week in turn, has surfaced as clearly the front runner for the Republican Party's nomination. And right at this moment, it's just almost the worst possible time for him to take a risk on his Middle East policy. And you can see it in his body language. You can see it in the statements he's making. You can see it in the discomfort from his spokesman. You can see it in the feebleness of Anthony Blinken when he's been asked questions. You've got to say, with all due respect to the presidency, he really has made a right mess of American foreign policy, and not just in the Middle East.
You say he's got a hot potato in his hand. Therefore, what should happen is he suddenly wakes up, takes action, and puts some pressure finally on Israel to stop the horror going on in Gaza. What's more likely to happen is that he drops the hot potato and just lets it slide.
Well, that is the nightmare scenario for the Democrats, because the continuation of this situation in Gaza, the possibility that we're going to talk about in a minute of extending further, the possibility of things getting really out of control is a hot potato that is going to, wherever you put it, it's going to be a big mess for US foreign policy at this critical moment. It doesn't look good. I don't know how he's going to get out of it. You saw how Biden was this feeble attempt to try and correct the record. So Netanyahu, who makes his statement pretty unambiguously, and then Biden phones up Netanyahu for the first time in a month, and then a briefing is put out that, in fact, Netanyahu hadn't absolutely ruled out all possibilities of a twin state solution. And this was repeated yesterday, I think, in a press conference.
No, but it was so feeble that it would just look. It made everybody look very stupid.
Exactly. And if Netanyahu does have second thoughts about what he said, he can just come out and say he does, but he hasn't. So, I mean, who is the monkey and who's the organ grinder in this performance? And the organ grinder looks like it's Mr. Netanyahu. and the monkey who's dancing to his tune, it looks like Mr. Joe Biden. That is not a good look for a
It's not a
president
good
of a
look.
presidential year.
Nonetheless, this American president is putting his troops in harm's way, as they say, in the Red Sea, where in order to protect shipping, US and UK Navy ships are missiling on the Houthis. Now, the Houthis have put up with a lot of attacks over the many years, and they are pretty robust. So whether they can get anywhere is a hard tell. Biden was asked about it, said, what's the aims? How's it going? And he said, is it working? No. So whether they're going to win anything down there, whether they're going to restore faith in the ship routes being open is hard to tell. But where do you see some of that action leading on to?
Well, the thing is that nobody can say they weren't warned. The vulnerability of the Suez Canal was demonstrated, 50 years ago, during and before, in 1956 and in 1973, the vulnerability of one of the most important routes for the world economy, through which a very high proportion of the world's oil and gas passes. It's been demonstrably vulnerable. The fact that this issue has now come up and people are startled shouldn't really be the case, because it's obvious that there is a vulnerability in this route. It's just that the vulnerability shifted down to the Bab al-Mandab between the Horn of Africa and Yemen. And the Houthis are taking advantage of the reality that they've got a lot of sitting targets passing within missile range. They have declared they're fighting a war on behalf of the Palestinians, that they want to do it until at least a ceasefire is implemented. And so it's kicked off. And again, the United States, apparently, despite the problems that have been in that area, we had piracy and other matters, haven't we, Francis? The United States doesn't have an adequate response to this. And what they're doing is what they have done as default for the last 30, 40 years. If in doubt, bomb someone.
You've got a very difficult situation there, because firstly, the US and UK, by accident almost, are suddenly becoming allies of Israel in the fighting. I mean, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So that's one very bad look across the Middle East, as they are fighting an ally of someone who says they're fighting for the Palestinians in Gaza. So that's one problem which seems to be, or they'll have to deal with. The second one,
Go ahead, Francis. Go ahead. Sorry.
The second one is that they're not going to achieve very much. It's difficult. I mean, I don't think you can allow someone to keep stopping shipping. So they have to somehow protect. But they're not going to stop because the Houthis have got some strategic depth in their mountains. They're going to keep going for a long time. The way through, in my view, is not to send missiles down on drone sites which can move around very easily. It's not something like, it's not a fixed redoubt or a fortress. The way through is to support the Saudis in their peace talks with the Houthi. The Houthis are very canny. They've been there since 2002, since they kicked off. They've been working with Ali Abdullah Saleh. They've been working against him. They know I think they fought 8 wars against him. They are very canny operators in that northern area of Yemen, very conservative tribal heartland based on Sa'da. And the Houthi have come in, taken over some of those tribal groups, and are now like a sort of full-on new Islamist organization. But they are at heart Yemeni, and they want a deal. They want to be part of the government. They are effectively the de facto government of what used to be called North Yemen. So they're ready to make a deal, and they've always got it with the Saudis. Whenever the Saudis blink, the Houthis say, give us a bit more. The Saudis blink, give us a bit more. And now they've got this distraction, which they've successfully arranged, of being bombed by the UK and the US.
Yeah, the thing about this affair is that here in London, where I live, it's very glibly dealt with in short television and newspaper articles and people who don't know the detail. And there is the assumption that somehow or other the Houthis don't have their own agency. The Houthis are puppets of someone else, and all you got to do is get back to the person who controls them, and you control the Houthis. But you've spent 6 months in Yemen, Francis. You know the country very well. It was North Yemen at the time, I believe. But the Houthi, they're their own people. I mean, they depend on, they're supported by the Iranians and others, and they, they're not completely autonomous, but they do have their own agency, don't they, Francis?
Very much so, and they are very much part of that tribal scene. They are within the Zayedi community of Shiite Islam. Now, the Zayedis are completely different from the Ismailis in Iran. There's no theological connection. However, if you're fighting a war and someone rocks up and says, "I'll give you some missiles and some money," you'll make friends with Iran or anybody else. And I read today that there were stories about people from Hizbollah and from the Revolutionary Guard, the Iranian Islamic Revolutionary Guard, helping the Houthis in their current work against the US and UK. So they are taking help from these people. But I think at core, they are their own operation, and they want to be part of a eventual Yemen. If you're going to look at the Yemeni solution, the Yemeni solution it has always been very poorly governed. Ali Abdullah Saleh ran a very feeble government, very little development, very little positive work. His only real ear was to the Americans, who gave him money, and he bombed the Al-Qaeda in the Arab Peninsula outfits to keep the money coming. There were three power groups: Ali Abdullah Saleh, General Ali al-Ahmar, and the Ahmar family. Those three groups worked around each other, taking money from the Saudis when they wanted it, could get it, not getting it sometimes. And in the middle of that chaos, the Houthis started this campaign of social renewal, of turning themselves into this kind of Islamic forceful group, which spread beyond those northern tribes. They're now quite effective. You said I was there. I was there, but it was a very long time ago. So I wouldn't say I was an expert on those others, but at least I've walked some of those hills. And those hills up in the north are very difficult to attack. That's why the Saudis have failed in their war against the North Yemen.
How does the UAE, Francis, how does the UAE fit in this story? Of course, the Saudis fought their last border war, was in the 1930s, to establish Saudi Arabian control over what, up to that point, had actually been claimed either by the Imam in what is now North Yemen. So the Saudi Arabians have a long-standing strategic interest. Hundreds of thousands of North Yemenis worked in Saudi Arabia for many years. The economy was very influenced by it. For a long time, the largest bank in Saudi Arabia, National Commercial Bank, was actually owned and run by a family that originated from Yemen. But how does the UAE fit into this story?
That's a complex and two allies. After 2011 and after Daesh it took over Iraq and Syria in 2014, the UAE and Saudi Arabia realized they were some of the last countries left standing. They formed a very close alliance. When the Houthi then came down and started their rebellion against Ali Abdullah Saleh, the two countries, the UAE and Saudi Arabia, said, we need an alliance. We have to keep the nation states going. We can't see the anarchy of the north coming onto the peninsula. As a result, they went to war. The UAE was at war as an ally with the government, but also with the Saudis. The Saudis focused on the north at the campaign against the Houthi. The UAE focused on the south in Mukalla first, and then they invaded Aden first, and then Mukalla, in the territory which leads up towards the UAE itself and the Omani border. The UAE won its war with its allies in the Southern Transitional Council, and these are separatists. When I was editor of the Gulf News in Dubai, as the UAE troops went in, we had pictures from the National News Agency. And I saw this picture of troops moving forward with their allies, and they were carrying a flag. The flag was a Yemeni flag with the red, white, and black, with a bright, pale blue corner piece with a silver star on it. This was the Southern Transitional Council. These were the breakaway troops who had been resisting the government of United Yemen. So I asked, and I said to, how come the UAE troops are fighting with a breakaway force? I mean, these guys have been revolutionary for the last 10 years. So, and the answer was, we will fight, and once there's a settlement, the Yemeni people will vote and they can choose who they want. The implication was that the UAE is ready to work with the Southern Transitional Council. It is effectively a very similar place to the UAE. They are a coastal people, they are traders, and the UAE tribes have many links to Hadramaut and Mahra and those areas. And so as the UAE, from the UAE's perspective, they see themselves spreading an arc of prosperity along the coastline of the Horn of Africa and down through to Kenya.
Yeah, amazing insights, Francis. And one of the things I do recall, I mean, Sheikh Zayed, I think, used to say, that he believed that his family, the Al-Nahyan, originated from Yemen. I think he used to say.
I mean, I'd have to. Yes,
I've done a long time ago, Francis, a long time
ago. And there are, there's that famous Adnan and Qahtan split in the tribes of Yemen and of the whole of the peninsula. But the Yemen has been an established population base for thousands of years, and as such remains an important part of what's going on there. But back to whether the US and UK are going to get out of that. Let's close down on this with a final thought on that bit of action which still continues.
Well, I think you've said it, and the experience is so extensive now. I mean, it's almost not worth saying. We have seen since, I mean, when did it start? I mean, I can't even remember, but certainly since 1990, 1991, we've seen more than 3 decades of the United Kingdom, United States, United Kingdom, principally using air power. And of course, they had troops on the ground in Iraq, but they quickly resiled from that experience. For most of that time, they have used air power, airstrikes, missiles, drones, and everything else as a means of projecting power. I think that the evidence is in, and we saw it in Afghanistan, and that it doesn't work. So
the political win is on the ground.
Well, it doesn't work. So I don't know who's advising Biden and Sunak and anybody else on this particular matter, but they must be completely ignorant of modern Middle East history.
So let's turn to another issue, which is the northern border of Israel, where there's been an effective low intensity war. I mean, if you're in the middle of it, you'd say it's relatively high intensity, that both sides are evacuating populations from near the border, and there is continual shelling on either side. Now, that, to my mind, whether the conventional wisdom for the last 2 or 3 months is that it will stay roughly controlled under, no one wants it to get too far. However, I see dangers because the missiles are beginning to fly around on that border is one. Israel, I think, has launched a missile into Damascus. Famously, it also sent one into Beirut and assassinated a Hamas leader. Iran has also launched some attacks, I think Erbil recently, as well as others on the American troops remaining in Iraq, which thoroughly panicked the Iraqi government, who said Americans have to get out. It's looking very febrile.
Exactly. And I think for a moment, empathize for a moment. And often I think that's what's lacking. I live in London, and people will talk about these matters and they will wring their hands. But what about real emotional empathy for people like the people of Lebanon? The people of Lebanon, more than 4 decades, have been traumatized by a series of wars, internal war, invasion, bombings. Their most celebrated prime minister was blown up to pieces, Rafah Hariri, in the middle of their capital city. What a trauma they've been through. So when this month a missile was fired, apparently by Israel, hit the Hamas commander in Beirut, for the first missile attack by Israel on Beirut since 2006, you can imagine the fear, in view of what's been happening in Gaza, that spread across Lebanon, particularly South Lebanon. people are really, really fearful that there will be an escalation. And that would lead in the south of Lebanon, particularly in the border areas, to the flight of hundreds of thousands of people. And already, I mean, the reality is already there. I was talking to some diplomats, and plans are already being laid by Western embassies for the evacuation of their passport holders from Beirut. That's up to 100,000, even more. These are people who were born in Lebanon, raised in Lebanon, but have secured British, American, Canadian, French passports, and they've gone back as part of the reconstruction and restore their families. And there are serious plans for mass evacuation of people out of Lebanon. This is another completely unwarranted and unnecessary and avoidable crisis that in the end, if it really takes off, is only going to inflict even more suffering and grief to the people of Lebanon. That's just Lebanon. Then you move over to, as you mentioned, the missile strike which hit the apparently revolutionary guards in Damascus, which cannot be an accident. It has to be targeted. And if it's not Israel, who else can it be? How can you look at this as being anything other than a provocation, an escalation? Whoever's mind is behind all this, I'm sure they're well-intentioned, but the effects are infernal.
I don't think there's one mind. I think there's various different minds all trying to grab advantage on any particular spot. Sometimes you hear, all roads lead to Tehran, and there's some mastermind there who's planning it all up to a point. But these proxies, they are proxies. They have been paid. They're getting money. They're getting weapons, but they also have their own positions. I mean, Hassan Nasrallah famously had to apologize the last time when he brought the Israelis in the war, which the last invasion. So after it all finished, he apologized to the Lebanese people for bringing them on their head. So there is while I'm not optimistic about the futures in Gaza and on Palestine, I have a sort of grim optimism about these missiles and other tensions on these different front lines, because I think there are enough cool heads around that nobody really wants a massive conflagration.
Well, that's always true, and they said that in 1914. I mean, you say there is no mastermind, but there is someone who, technically speaking, is the most powerful person in the world, commander-in-chief of the largest army in the world. He's the head of state of the largest economy in the world. That is President Biden.
But he's sorry, I'm interrupting. He's also the commander-in-chief of the army which went into Iraq and failed in its war aims, of the army which went into Afghanistan and retreated after 20 or more years. And so the American use of military invasion in the Middle East has been proved, if you can withstand it, to have been a disaster.
Well, I'm not so. I mean, I'll go wider than that, actually. It's the President of the United States. We in the United Kingdom, for very good reasons, have always looked towards the United States as our partner, our ally, our friend, and also the inspiration for everything that's happened in Europe and the world since 1945. The restoration of democracy in Europe, the development of the economy, all shaped by American vision. And the United States provided, to an extent, which a great extent, the leadership that was required. And that came often from the president. The last president, in my opinion, who's shown any meaningful leadership capacities in the Middle East. And what I mean is not just invading and bombing and ordering interventions. It's someone who's got a real vision. And that was President George H. Bush. He only did 4 years, a man who's much forgotten. But he was really, I thought, he had real leadership and he engaged the whole region.
And he also
Biden is just not that guy. And the question is Trump that guy? It's impossible if he is. So the vacuum on American foreign policy is going to continue.
No, not a chance, because Bush Sr. famously liberated Kuwait from the invasion and stopped at the border and said, that's it. Now, maybe he betrayed the Iraqis, who he said rise up, and they got slaughtered. But he did control his single mission and stayed on track.
Can I just say something about that matter? The reason why he did it, the reason why people say, George H. Bush, I mean, he should have finished the job, is because he listened to his advisors. Every single credible, authoritative expert on the Middle East region, and Iraq in particular, said Stop at the Kuwait border. Don't go into Iraq. They all said it. I sat in row after row of British diplomats of decades' experience in the Middle East who said that. They were advising him most strongly. And he did what he was advised. The fact he didn't solve everything is not his fault. The fault for that resides with successors, starting with Clinton and ever since, who have been unable to adopt and apply anything approaching what I would consider a coherent and credible Middle East policy. But I think that moment's come to an end. Either the United States are going to get one, or they're going to have to get out. I mean, it's as simple as that.
No. They've been saying they're going to get out ever since they tried to tilt to the Asia, and they've tried various to avoid that. They are stuck in the Middle East for a very long time.
Well,
we're starting now on a very long topic.
Can I just rephrase that? Get out of the way. Maybe get out of the way, because the White House and Biden is not helping at all the people of the Middle East, and everybody in the Middle East, including the people of Israel.
The last thought here, I think that what they have to do is they have to stay in and put some pressure on Israel, genuine pressure, to say your blank check is closed. You now have to face up to the realities that we won't forever bail you out politically and economically. Eddie, I think we have to stop at that stage. It's been a pleasure, or perhaps not a mixed pleasure. Talking is always good.
Hopefully it's a joy, Francis. And I've got to say, your expertise and your knowledge of the region, the intimate experience is enviable. And so I look forward to our next show, because I think you bring such a lot of really invaluable insights. And it's great to talk to someone with so much depth of knowledge. I have some. And it's great to talk, Francis. So God bless. Thanks very much.
Exchange compliments a lot, but I value your knowledge. So we hope that everybody's enjoyed it. If you have some comments, please feel free to jump in. This session has gone on over many, many topics, and we are, despite appearances, not the only source. There are others out there, and please join us with the conversation. So for now, thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.